There are stories Hogwarts never tells. Not because they're too dark, but because they're too complicated. Too quiet. Too real. This is one of them. A story not found in books. A name never mentioned in the Prophet. A woman never meant to be seen. They called her Professor Monroe. But no one ever really called her that to her face. They were too busy staring. Too busy whispering. She was different. She walked the castle halls like she owned them, not with arrogance, but with that slow, quiet confidence that made the world adjust around her. Her robes fit just a little too well. Her braid swung like a weapon behind her. And when she looked at you, really looked at you, you forgot whatever clever thing you were about to say. Most of the boys couldn't focus when she taught. Most of the girls hated that. And the professors? Well, they didn't know what to do with someone who looked like sin and lectured like a soldier. You see, she didn't grow up in Diagon Alley. She didn't read bedtime stories about unicorns and blood wards. She grew up on military bases, in Germany, in Italy, in places where the windows were bulletproof and silence was survival. She was the daughter of a Muggle soldier. A cheer captain. A homecoming queen. And at 16, she received a letter that changed everything. Not from Salem. From Hogwarts. She arrived late. Too old to blend in. Too American to be ignored. Too beautiful to be taken seriously. And that was their mistake. Because beneath the soft lips and high cheekbones was a mind built for strategy. And a body trained for war. Not the kind with dragons. The kind with consequences. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She spoke like someone who knew just how long it took to bleed out from a cursed wound. And how to stop it. She wore combat boots under her teaching robes. She mapped the school in runes and pressure points. She trained students in secret because she knew what was coming. Long before the castle did. If you're still listening, tap the like button. It tells us you're ready for more than just magic. You're ready for the story of a woman who made herself unforgettable by being the one no one was supposed to remember. She arrived in late August. No fanfare. No newspaper coverage. No ministry ceremony. Just a pair of worn leather gloves in one hand and a wand holstered at her thigh. She didn't sit at the center of the staff table. She took a seat at the far end, beneath the torchlight, and said almost nothing during the welcoming feast. But people looked. They always did. Some thought she was a new 7th year. Some thought she was part Veela. Some wondered why the headmistress introduced her last, and so softly. "This is Professor Monroe," McGonagall said. "She will be teaching advanced magical strategy and defensive theory." The room went quiet. And then the whispers began. Her robes, they said, were custom-tailored. She smelled like peppermint and snowfall. She walked like she had secrets. Some students leaned forward. Some staff leaned back. Snape refused to look at her. Slughorn looked too long. And all across the hall, jealousy began to bloom like a weed in moonlight. Because she was beautiful, not in the polished, perfumed, ministry-approved way. No. Her beauty was something else. Something earned. The curve of her back. The scar under her left ear. The way her sleeves always seemed to fall just far enough to reveal the muscle in her forearm, and nothing more. She didn't flirt. She didn't need to. She was the kind of woman who made people nervous just by existing in the same room too long. And when she spoke, it wasn't softness they heard. It was discipline. Cut sharp. Like the edge of something trained not to break. She told her students, "You're not here to win duels. You're here to survive them." She told the staff, "If you think my face is the problem, then you haven't been in the right kind of fight." And at night, when the halls were quiet, she walked alone. Mapping staircases. tracing walls, leaving little protective charms no one would notice until they were needed. Because while the others debated who was worthy of a title, Calla Monroe had already begun preparing for a war. One no one else believed was coming. If you're still with us, go ahead and subscribe. Because next, you'll hear what she did when the first spells hit the stone. When the castle caught fire. And when the girl they whispered about became the only thing holding Hogwarts together. The rain beat hard against the castle's ancient windows as students filed into the Great Hall, their voices raised in chatter and speculation. Autumn cloaked the stone in mist, and lightning flashed over the forbidden forest in the distance. Another school year was beginning, but for once, the air was not simply thick with excitement. It was also charged with something else. Curiosity. Anticipation. Gossip. At the head table, nestled between Professor Flitwick and Madam Hooch, sat someone no one recognized. She was young, alarmingly young, and beautiful in a way that drew the eye without even trying. Long, honey-blonde hair flowed down her shoulders in a perfectly undone cascade. Her robes were sleek and a shade darker than midnight, with golden trim that caught the candlelight as she adjusted her posture. A single gold chain adorned her throat, the charm beneath her collar glinting now and again like a secret. The students were not the only ones whispering. "I thought she was a student," murmured Parvati Patil to Lavender Brown, who nodded mutely, eyes wide. Ron Weasley stared too long and got a sharp nudge from Hermione. Professor McGonagall stood at the center of the staff table, her gaze sweeping the hall. "As you may have noticed," she said, dryly, "we have a new face among our staff this term." The young woman rose slowly, deliberately, with the sort of poise that made even the older students sit up straighter. She smiled, just a little. Just enough. "This is Professor Calla Monroe. She'll be teaching a new elective course offered to fourth years and above, Magical Strategy and Defensive Theory, in collaboration with the Department of Magical Law Enforcement." There was a beat of silence. Then murmurs broke out. "Magical what? Did she just say strategy? Sounds like a joke class." Professor Monroe inclined her head slightly, unbothered. "You may sit, Professor," McGonagall added, stiffly. She didn't smile. Calla returned to her seat and calmly lifted her goblet. Her nails were painted matte black. Not a chip in sight. Professor Slughorn leaned toward her with a jovial chuckle. "My dear, I haven't seen robes tailored like that since my visit to Paris in '78. Calla smiled without showing teeth. "War room chic. It's all the rage." Professor Snape made a sound halfway between a snort and a cough. "Let's hope your fashion sense is not all you've brought to the classroom." She turned to him, lifting one brow. "You'll be the first to know if it is." At the far end of the table, Dumbledore chuckled softly. The next morning, the first class of Magical Strategy and Defensive Theory gathered in one of the lesser-used towers. The space was different, no desks, just cushioned benches in a ring around a magically projected battlefield map. Arcane symbols hovered in midair. A giant blackboard bore no writing, only a quote written in chalk. "Magic without intent is just noise." Professor Monroe stood at the center, arms behind her back, surveying the students like a general inspecting a new regiment. "Good morning," she said, her voice crisp and American. "Welcome to the art of thinking before you hex someone." A few students snorted. One boy, a smirking sixth year from Slytherin, raised a hand. "Are you really a professor?" "Like, officially." She walked toward him with a casual slowness that made several students unconsciously sit straighter. "What's your name?" "Marcus Bletchley." "Marcus." Her heels echoed lightly on the stone floor. Would you say that question was born of genuine curiosity or insecurity? The class stilled. Marcus blinked. Never mind." She turned on her heel. "We'll start with positioning theory. How many of you know the difference between a suppressing hex and a disruption jinx?" She waited. Silence. Well, at least you're honest. By the end of the lesson, even Hermione was watching her with an unreadable expression. She moved with unusual grace, switching effortlessly between chalk and wand, Muggle references, and magical diagrams. She quoted Sun Tzu and Elfrida Clag in the same breath. At one point, she perched on the edge of the enchanted table to demonstrate a counterspin disarming maneuver. Her robe shifted, revealing a line of toned thigh and a glimpse of runic tattoos that shimmered faintly under her skin. Half the boys forgot to breathe. The other half forgot where their wands were. When the bell rang, students flooded the halls whispering. She used to live in Italy. She trained with the hit wizards. She beat up a vampire in Munich. Do you think she's single? Ron Weasley bumped into a suit of armor. That night, Calla sat alone in her quarters, perched on the windowsill with one leg tucked under her, watching the rain trail down the glass. Her tea had gone cold. Papers lay scattered across her bed, dueling diagrams, curriculum plans, a half-drafted paper titled Applied Chaos, Muggle Warfare and Magical Escalation. A letter from her father, back on a military base in Arizona, sat open beside her. She lifted her wand and whispered, "Silentio." The room went still. Alone with her thoughts, she touched the wand to the side of her neck, just beneath the golden chain. A thin, invisible scar flashed briefly in the mirror. They didn't know her. Not yet. But they would. By the second week of term, the school had turned her into a myth. They whispered about her in the hallways like she was a legend smuggled in from another world, one with lipstick, muscle memory, and a gaze that could cut through stone. Professor Monroe. She said things like tactical discipline and intentional magic, and she walked like the floor belonged to her, like she'd grown up not in a suburb or a seaside cottage, but a war zone. But no amount of myth-making could hide the truth. They weren't taking her seriously. Not yet. In her third-year defense class, a Gryffindor boy dropped his quill for the third time just to have her lean down and pick it up. She didn't rise to it, just returned it with a raised brow and no smile. Across the room, a Ravenclaw girl muttered too loudly, "She only teaches posture and flirting." It's like defense against the dark dress code. Laughter rippled. Calla heard it. And did nothing. Instead, she summoned her chalk with a flick of her wand and wrote in capital letters across the board. Tactics don't care if you're attractive. Death Eaters don't get jealous, they get results. Then, in silence, she made them all copy the quote 5 times before continuing the lesson. In the staff room, things weren't much better. "She's more spectacle than substance," Professor Sinistra whispered to Vector over tea. "I mean, defense and strategy? She's barely older than the 7th years." "She's clever," Flitwick offered mildly, sipping his espresso. "I read her thesis on non-linear battlefield enchantment." "Very sharp." Snape exhaled sharply through his nose. "She's an infant. Dumbledore's latest attempt at counter-programming. Parade a golden-haired poster girl in front of teenage boys and hope they forget the war." "She's fought in one," Flitwick reminded him. Snape's expression did not change. "So have you. But at least you don't wear perfume like a siren." Calla walked in just as the room fell silent. She poured herself a mug of coffee, black, no sugar, and stood by the window. "Don't let me stop you," she said coolly. "I can make my own assumptions later." That evening, she stayed long after classes ended. The torches in her tower classroom flickered against the walls, casting warm gold against the stone. Calla stood barefoot on a conjured platform at the center of the room, wand in one hand, chalk hovering beside her, diagramming movement spells in real time. Her robes hung loosely from her shoulders, and beneath them, thin cotton training gear clung to her like a second skin. Beads of sweat curled at her neck. The room was silent except for her voice, low and precise. "Shift on the 3rd count. Pulse magic toward the target, not around it. Don't defend where they are, defend where they'll be." She caught her breath, adjusted her stance, and flicked her wand. A shimmering blue shield unfurled in a spiral, then collapsed inward like a breath sucked in reverse. From the doorway, someone clapped slowly. Impressive for an evening rehearsal. She turned, wand already halfway lifted, then lowered it when she saw the silhouette. It was Harry. He stepped in, sheepish, hands in his pockets. "Sorry." Door was open. "Most are," she said. "The ones that matter." He tilted his head toward the diagrams. "You're training?" "Always." "You train like a soldier." Calla arched a brow. "That's because I was one." He nodded, quiet. "Then, I've never seen anyone cast a shield like that before. It curved before impact." "That's not standard." "It's not," she agreed. "It's predictive." Harry stepped closer, examining the now fading diagram of concentric lines and ripple fields. She handed him a piece of chalk. Their fingers touched. He looked up. Her eyes, up close, were not blue, as everyone assumed, but something stranger. Ice gray at the center, fading to gold at the rim. He blinked. Calla stepped back. "Draw how you defend against a two-prong hex assault from opposite flanks." He hesitated. She smiled faintly. "I'll only judge you a little." As he began to draw, she crossed her arms, watching, but part of her remained, still. Waiting. Waiting for him to prove he wasn't just the boy who lived, but a boy who learned. Later, after he left, stammering thanks and still unsure whether he'd been challenged or flirted with, Calla extinguished the torches with a flick of her wand. Her shoulders ached. Her feet hurt. But her mind was awake. They didn't trust her. Not yet. But they were starting to see her. The classroom was dark, save for one candle flickering in the corner. Calla Monroe sat alone on the floor, cross-legged, her wand resting gently across her knees. Behind her, the enchanted diagrams had faded. The air was warm and still, as if the room itself were waiting. She breathed in slowly. The walls began to dissolve. Flashback, Berlin, age 12. There was shouting in the hallway, boots on linoleum, radios crackling in German. Calla pressed her back against the bunkroom door, arms wrapped around her little brother. He was shaking. She wasn't. She counted the sounds. 2 sets of boots. 1 voice, male. Aggressive. The other, calmer. American accented. Her father. There was a gun in the desk drawer. She knew how to hold it but not how to fire it. She knew how to bandage a wound. She knew how to disappear if she had to. No one had ever taught her why. The shouting stopped. Her father opened the door. His uniform was dusted with snow. His jaw was clenched. He looked at her like she wasn't a little girl. Like she was a soldier. Flashback, Italy, age 15. She was flying through the air, not on a broomstick, but through a cheer routine. Top of the pyramid. Spotless smile. Applause echoing through the courtyard of a US embassy school. She hit the ground with a perfect finish, waved, and walked off. 10 minutes later, she was alone behind the locker room, staring at the corner of her hand where her skin had just sparked. She hadn't told anyone. Not yet. Flashback, Boston, age 16. The letter came not from Salem, but from somewhere older. Wetter. British. Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Her father had read it in silence. Her mother had cried, not out of joy, but out of something more complicated. Calla sat at the table, her homecoming sash still in her duffel bag, and said only one thing. So it's real. Flashback, the Hogwarts Express, first ride. At 16, she had the body of a varsity athlete, the polish of a diplomat's daughter, and no idea what a hippogriff was. British first year squawked at her accent and age. Older students whispered she was adopted by the school. Some called her a ministry plant. She walked through the train as if she belonged anyway. She didn't know where to sit. So she stood. All the way to the castle. Back in the present, Calla opened her eyes. The classroom was still. The candle had burned low. There was a soft sound behind her. "Professor!" She turned. At the door stood Luna Lovegood, barefoot, her wand tucked behind her ear like a pencil. Calla blinked. "Luna! You're not scheduled until Friday." "I know." Luna stepped in gently, as if not to wake the stone. "But I had a feeling you might be here. And that you might be sad." Calla tilted her head. "I don't do sad." "You don't do it loudly," Luna corrected. There was a silence, and then Calla smiled, just a little. Luna walked across the room and sat beside her on the stone floor, folding her legs gracefully. "You're the only professor who looks like she's about to run off and save the world between classes," Luna said dreamily. "And I think most people are scared of that." "They're not scared. They're confused," Calla replied. "They think I'm the distraction, not the defense." "But you're both," Luna said simply. "Which is why you're dangerous." Calla turned to look at her, properly. For the first time, she saw Luna not as a whispery daydreamer or the odd girl in mismatched shoes. She saw a witch. Wise beyond her years. Unburdened by vanity. Untroubled by structure. Quietly, she asked, "Why do you take my class?" Luna tilted her head. "Because you teach things no one else does. Because you walk like you know more than you're allowed to say. And because you've been preparing for a war since before you knew it was magical." Calla blinked. Then looked away. "That's a heavy thing to carry," she said. "I've carried worse," Luna replied. That night, Calla enchanted a new corner of her office, a small space tucked behind a false wall, and began mapping alternate escape routes through the castle. Not for herself. For the students no one thought needed protection. And she pinned a photo, the first thing on the board, of herself at 16. Uniform too crisp. Eyes too alert. A transfer no one trusted. A girl who hadn't yet learned to disappear with power. Beneath it, she wrote in fine script. "Know your entry. Plan your exit. Leave the world better behind you." The days grew darker earlier now. By the end of September, the castle was often cast in a smoky grey before dinner, the torches lit with a touch more urgency. Shadows clung to the hallways. Rumors clung even tighter. Professor Monroe had become a source of fascination. She glided through the halls like she belonged to another version of Hogwarts, one that never made it into the stories. Her heels echoed differently. Her posture never slouched. And yet, the more perfect she appeared, the more fragile her reputation. Had too much guilt behind his eyes and flinched at every compliment. Seamus Finnegan followed, brash, loyal, always quick with a wand but quicker to apologize after misfires. Then Ginny Weasley, not sent by her brothers or Harry, but of her own will, eyes fierce with the same quiet fire Calla recognized in herself. No forms. No fanfare. Just a note pinned to the corkboard in the Gryffindor common room. Learn to fight smarter. Room 5F. Midnight. No prefects. No excuses. That week, Calla taught them 3 things. How to disarm a moving opponent while retreating. How to cast without speaking, even mid-breath. How to sense intent before the wand was ever raised. "This isn't about magic," she said, arms crossed as they panted in front of her after a drill. "It's about decision under pressure. You need to own the moment before your enemy takes it from you." Ginny narrowed her eyes. "Is that from a spellbook?" Calla smiled, just barely. "It's from my father. U.S. Army." He taught me how to clear a room before I learned how to levitate a quill. The room went quiet. Even Seamus stopped bouncing his wand in his palm. Later that night, she passed Harry in the corridor. He was coming from the library. She was heading toward the astronomy tower. They met under the arch of a flickering sconce. "You're training students," he said. It wasn't a question. "So are you," she replied. "Though I imagine yours come with less flack." Harry didn't smile. "You didn't tell McGonagall." "She wouldn't approve." "She might, if she knew you weren't just showing off." Calla stepped forward slowly, closing the space between them. Not threatening. Not inviting. Just present. Her voice dropped slightly. "You think I'm showing off?" "I think," Harry hesitated. "I think you like being underestimated." She smiled, slow and sharp. "I like proving people wrong." Then, without warning, she flicked her wand. A silent jet of violet light screamed toward him. He blocked it, just barely, and stumbled back. "What the hell?" Calla was already circling. "If you're going to confront someone, confront them ready. No one's going to wait for you to be sure." Harry dropped his bag and raised his wand. "You want a duel?" "I want to know if you're as good as your legend," she said, tone low. "Or just lucky." They clashed. The hallway lit up in bursts, red, blue, silver. She was faster. He was stronger. She used misdirection and geometry, he used reflex and instinct. Once, he almost caught her. She dropped and rolled with a dancer's ease, hair flying. Finally, they both hit the stone floor at the same time, wands pointed at each other's throats. Breathing hard. Neither cast. A beat passed. Harry stared at her. "You're better than they say," he said. Calla's breath evened. "You're not just famous." He helped her to her feet. Their hands lingered a moment longer than necessary. For just a second, neither of them let go. His palm was warm against hers, rougher than she expected. She met his eyes. There was nothing boyish there. She knew, in that breath, that if she leaned forward, just slightly, he wouldn't stop her. The thought landed low in her stomach. Not reckless. Not shameful. Just human. She let go first. But hours later, lying awake in the dark, she would still feel the weight of that choice pressing against her skin. As he walked away, she called after him. "You should send Hermione to me. I think she'd like what I'm teaching more than she pretends." Harry didn't answer. But the next week, Hermione showed up to room 5F. That same night, Calla was called to McGonagall's office. The deputy headmistress waited behind her desk, arms folded, glasses perched on the edge of her nose like a weapon. "I hear you've been organizing extracurricular instruction," she said. Calla didn't blink. "I have. Without approval. No offense, but your approval has never been my measure of necessity." McGonagall's eyes narrowed. "You're reckless." "I'm prepared." "You're too young to teach war." Calla leaned forward, voice quiet. "That's exactly why I'm the right person." Silence stretched. Then, very quietly, McGonagall said, "They like you." "The students." "They trust me." McGonagall's eyes softened, barely. "I still think you're a risk," she said. Calla rose. "Then keep watching." She turned and left the office, her cloak whispering across the stone floor behind her like a shadow slipping into war. There were things stirring beneath Hogwarts that most couldn't feel. But Calla Monroe had been raised on baseboards and briefing rooms. She didn't wait for alarms to sound. She listened to air pressure shifts, memorized footfall patterns, and counted seconds between silences. And now, silence had begun to stretch too long in the halls. The corridors were off. It wasn't just the creak of aging magic. It was something colder. Intentional. Like the school itself had started bracing. It began with Malfoy. She saw him from the divination tower, a silver blur moving beneath the courtyard portico, alone, face pale in the low light. He glanced over his shoulder like someone being hunted by his own reflection. His steps were sharp but never loud. He wore his Slytherin tie loose, jaw clenched as if against a scream. She didn't move. Just watched. Malfoy vanished through the side entrance of the castle, a door students weren't allowed to use. One that led, eventually, to the room of requirement. She tapped her wand against the railing. "Mark it," she whispered. A soft blue rune shimmered under the stone. Her own surveillance system, custom, undetectable, inspired by Muggle sonar grid logic. It would track movement patterns without needing to see. Another thing they didn't teach at Hogwarts. That night, she ran her fingers across the war map on her office wall. A half-dozen floating markers hovered in place. Student tracking charms she'd discreetly affixed to the shoes and cloaks of those she suspected were in danger, or danger themselves. Malfoy's marker was blinking. At 2:15 a.m. Every night this week. In the same northern wing. He's not just hiding, she thought. He's preparing. She was reviewing her theories when the knock came. 3 soft raps. She turned. No one ever knocked at this hour, not unless. The door opened before she reached it. "Ah," said the voice, kind and weathered. "Still awake, Professor Monroe?" Calla blinked. "Headmaster." Albus Dumbledore stepped inside her office like it had always been part of his route. His eyes twinkled the way sunlight sometimes danced just before a storm. "I hope I'm not disturbing anything critical," he said. "Only the illusion that I get any sleep," she replied. He smiled, faint and far off, and his gaze swept the room, diagrams, shields, pin spell blueprints, and war table, all laid out like an open book of paranoia. "You've built quite the map," he said. "I prefer to know what's happening before the floor caves in," she said. He turned to her, now serious. "And what do you think is happening?" She met his eyes. "I think Draco Malfoy is preparing for something," she said. "I don't know what yet. But it's coming." Dumbledore nodded slowly. "He is." Calla hesitated. "You knew." "I suspected," he said. "But I believe in allowing young men to choose whether they are cowards or martyrs." She exhaled. "You're not stopping him." "I'm watching him," he said gently. "Much like you are." She tilted her head. "You didn't come here just to compare surveillance tactics." "No," he admitted. "I came because I believe the time has come to stop treating you as the faculty's favorite rumor." He paused. Then said, carefully, "I'd like to offer you a place in the order." Calla said nothing for a full 10 seconds. Then, "On what grounds?" "On the grounds," he said, "that you see things others miss. And that you've already been fighting your own war since before most of this staff understood what war meant." She crossed her arms. Her heartbeat was steady, but her breath wasn't. "What do you want me to do?" Dumbledore walked slowly around her desk, fingers brushing the edge of her map. "I want you to keep watching. But not as a lone strategist. As a quiet line of defense. Watch the halls. Watch the students. And if something breaks before I can stop it, hold the line until others arrive." Calla's eyes narrowed. "That sounds like a suicide pact." Dumbledore smiled. "No. It's a trust fall." She studied him. And for once, she saw no whimsy in his face. Only quiet weight. Finally, she nodded once. "I'll need unrestricted passage. No questions from staff. You'll have it. And the right to mark students for protection, without paperwork. Consider it done." She extended her hand. He took it, Her fingers were warm. His were colder than she expected. As he turned to leave, he paused at the door. "One more thing, Professor Monroe." "Yes?" "If you should ever need anything, someone to remind the others who you really are, send for me. Even at midnight." She smiled. "You're not what I expected, Headmaster." He chuckled. "Neither are you." That night, she sat back down at her map, drew a new line, and carved a new name into the table, in small, careful print. Malfoy, D. Watch closely. Then, below that, Dumbledore, trust. With caution. She extinguished the lights, tied back her hair, and closed her eyes to listen. To footsteps. To silence. To war, already humming beneath the stone. The castle was asleep. Even the ghosts had gone still, their wanderings paused as if the night had made even memory heavy. High above the sleeping dormitories, in the shadows of the West Tower, the lights in Professor Monroe's chambers glowed low and golden. The fire had burned down to a whisper. The window was half cracked open to let in the cool breath of October. Rain tapped lightly on the sill. She stood before the mirror, slowly unfastening her robes. First the shoulders, cloth slipping down smooth skin, the gold trim catching for just a moment on the curve of her collarbone. Then the long, dark underlayer, unlaced with practiced ease. She let it fall around her ankles, revealing skin kissed in torchlight, muscles shaped by years of motion, movement, resistance. Calla Monroe was not a woman who adorned herself for attention. She wore beauty like a sheath, useful, dangerous, sharp in the right hands. And when the world wasn't looking, she allowed herself to be soft. She sat on the edge of her bed, the sheets cool against her thighs. The candlelight danced across the scar beneath her ribs, a mark from a duel not in a classroom, but behind a tavern in Dubrovnik. She ran her fingers along it absent-mindedly, almost lovingly. Her eyes fluttered shut. For a moment, she was nowhere. Not at war. Not at Hogwarts. Not under suspicion or behind a map of threats. Just breath. Just warmth. Just stillness. One hand rested over her stomach. The other drifted. Not far. Just enough. The exhale came slow. Measured. Deep. Then stillness again. The candle burned lower. Outside, the rain picked up, the kind of rain that washes old blood from stone. That erases footsteps, but not the paths they follow. Inside, Calla slipped beneath the sheets, one bare leg folding against the other, and closed her eyes. She would wake in 4 hours. She always did. But for now, she let herself be something no one expected. At peace. The hour had turned without warning. It was that strange, silent space just past midnight, when the castle held its breath, and even the portrait seemed to hush. Calla was in motion long before the others stirred. She had felt it. Not a sound, not a scream. Just the sudden drop in air pressure, the shift in magic that pulsed through the ancient stones like a heartbeat speeding up. Something had broken loose. She left her chambers barefoot, wand gripped low in one hand, her long indigo coat sweeping behind her like a shadow. She cast no light, she didn't need it. Her path was already mapped. By the time the first screams echoed from above, she was halfway to the astronomy tower. The first duel found her. 2 masked figures emerged from the smoke near the moving staircases, cloaked, fast, wands raised. She didn't pause. She dropped low, spun, and fired 3 silent spells in rapid sequence. First, a concussive hex that sent the larger one crashing into the stone wall. Second, a disarming blast, curved mid-air like a thrown dagger, that ripped the wand from the second's grip. Third, a silent spell. She didn't want screams. Not yet. Both fell without a word. She kept moving. At the top of the tower, spells exploded like lightning in reverse. From behind a stone spire, she caught the flash of red, Sectum Sempra, and the answering green of Avada Kedavra. She recognized Snape's wand. And Draco's silhouette. And then, the shape that fell. Dumbledore. Falling. Like a broken star. She did not cry out. She did not run forward. She calculated. 3 Death Eaters on the rooftop. 2 descending toward the inner stair. And Snape, vanishing. She moved to intercept. A masked witch lunged at her from behind a column. Calla dropped to her knees, swept a leg, and fired a narrow, whip-like curse up the attacker's cloak seam. It struck spine. The body collapsed with a choked gasp. Another rounded on her, this one faster. Fire burst from their wand. She rolled through the flames, wand in reverse grip, and cast upward with a blast so focused it cracked the gargoyle above them. It fell. The Death Eater didn't get up. She chased the third to the corridor. There, Snape stood over an unconscious student, Ginny, and turned as she raised her wand. Their eyes locked. "Get out of my way," she said. "I'm protecting her," Snape snapped. "She doesn't need your American heroics right now." Calla stepped forward. "You just murdered our headmaster." He did not flinch. "And you just killed 2 of my operatives." "Good." A beat. Then, his voice dropped. Soft. Dangerous. "You're not part of this, Monroe." "I am now." Snape stared at her, then nodded, once. Something bitter in his mouth. Something that almost looked like regret. "I suggest you carry her," he said, stepping back from Ginny's still body. "The roof is no longer safe." She didn't ask questions. She levitated Ginny with a flick of her fingers, wrapped her in a blanket of shielding light, and backed away, wand never leaving Snape's chest. He vanished into the dark. She got Ginny to safety. She returned to the corridor. Smoke filled the air now. The fire in the Great Hall had spread. Students were evacuating, her protective charms already kicking in. She didn't sleep that night. She worked. Ward after ward. Rescue after rescue. Her coat blackened by ash. Her wand arm numb. Her lips cracked from muttering spells until her throat burned. She fought until morning broke, not because she was brave, but because there was no one else left in that part of the castle. And because Calla Monroe had promised Dumbledore she'd hold the line. At dawn, she sat on the outer ledge of the North Tower, bare feet dangling above the courtyard. Her hair was singed at the ends. Her coat torn. Blood, someone else's, streaked the front of her robes. Professor McGonagall found her there. Neither spoke at first. Then Minerva said, voice stiff, "I'm told you saved 14 students last night." Calla didn't look at her. Should have been 15. A long silence. Then, McGonagall sat beside her, knees creaking with effort. "You were never just a theory," she said. Calla looked over slowly. "I never was." And for the first time, McGonagall saw it. Not the beauty. Not the posture. But the soldier. And nodded. They buried Dumbledore beneath a white tomb by the lake. Calla watched from the back. She did not cry. She did not wear mourning robes. She wore deep grey, like weather just before it breaks. The sky above Hogwarts was a blank, pewter sheet. Too quiet. Too clean. The wind didn't even dare move the grass. When they lowered the casket, most bowed their heads. Calla didn't. She looked straight ahead. Eyes open. Because if she looked away, she might forget the way he'd fallen. And she didn't believe in forgetting. The next week, everything changed. The ministry fell. Snape was appointed headmaster. And the Carrows arrived. Amicus and Alecto. Ugly magic. Ugly teeth. Ugly minds. They reeked of old blood and smoke, and walked the halls like predators. Alecto handled Muggle studies. Amicus took over defense. Both ruled with threat spells and punishments that left welts. They laughed when they saw Calla at the staff table. "You're still here." Alecto cackled. Thought the Yank would have packed up her lipstick and gone home. Calla sipped her tea. "I never go home," she said softly. The table went quiet. Snape said nothing. But he didn't remove her. So she stayed. But not as a professor. Not exactly. She cancelled her elective. Officially. Claimed the curriculum had been rejected by the new administration. In truth, she moved underground. Her tower classroom became a supply depot. Her mapped corridors were re-encoded. Her war table turned into a moving simulation of student locations and staff patrols. And Room 5F, the old dueling practice chamber, became something else entirely. A headquarters. She let Neville take over day-to-day instruction. Ginny handled morale. Luna brought odd little charms that made everyone feel warmer, safer. Calla stayed in the shadows. Like a ghost that whispered tactics and sent back up just before things turned ugly. She became the spell behind the curtain. The hand that didn't get caught. One night, Ginny found her repairing an old cloak charm with trembling hands. "You look thinner," Ginny said. "And exhausted." Calla didn't look up. "I'm fine." "You're not," Ginny said. "You're punishing yourself for not being faster." That night, Calla finally paused. Her voice was very quiet. "I should have reached the tower sooner." "You did more than anyone," Ginny said. "You held half the north wing alone." Calla didn't answer. Ginny stepped closer. There was fire behind her voice. "You're not a god. You're a girl with a wand and a spine of steel. That's enough." Calla's shoulders loosened slightly. She met Ginny's eyes. "I was trained to move first," she said. "To see trouble and intercept. But this war, that keeps moving the lines. Then we move with them," Ginny said. "But not alone." Over the months, her name became a whisper. "The General. She's watching. Always watching. If you get caught, look for a flicker of gold light. That means she's near." She crafted her own spells, tracking hexes that rode dust, mirror messages that appeared only under moonlight, cloaking fields woven into the hems of school robes. Even the Carrows began to speak more cautiously. They could never catch her. But they knew she was there. Some nights, she stood just outside the Great Hall, wand hidden in her sleeve, watching Amicus pace during detention. If he raised his wand to strike, the tip would sputter, a hex Calla had in bed. In Claw, Hufflepuff, and even Slytherin. She had built a network. She had become what Hogwarts needed, not a hero. But a shadow too sharp to ignore. And then, one night, a patroness came. Not hers. Someone else's. Silver light. Fox-shaped. And it spoke just for words. "They're coming. Prepare now." It was well past curfew. Outside, the trees of the Forbidden Forest whispered in the wind, and the lake's surface shimmered silver with starlight. The castle had settled into uneasy sleep, but in a forgotten wing of the West Tower, one light remained, soft, golden, steady. Calla Monroe stood at her mirror. The day's tension still clung to her like a second skin. Her wand lay quiet beside a dish of silver rings. Her boots had been kicked aside. Her coat, soot-streaked from patrolling cursed corridors, hung from the bedpost. Her body, tall, lean, and unreasonably strong for someone so quiet, moved with slow, practiced grace as she removed the last of her uniform. She unfastened each clasp with fingers still bruised from training drills, the fabric slipping from her shoulders like a sigh. Beneath it, dark cotton underlayers, sweat slick and sculpted to her curves. Calla never wore silk. She wore gear. Trim. Functional. Hugging the line between athletic and severe. Her thighs were marked with fading spellburn scars, thin as ink, like calligraphy etched on muscle. Her stomach, firm and angular, bore the faint trace of a ward brand from her training days in Eastern Europe. Her shoulders rolled back with a subtle, fluid confidence, like someone who knew she could lift her own weight, and someone else's. She leaned toward the mirror, inspecting a nick beneath her jaw, a glancing curse from a first-year duel that had gone too far. She pressed a salve against it and exhaled, long and quiet. Then she sat at the edge of the bed. The tension gathered in her spine uncoiled slowly. One leg bent, the other stretched out. And for a while, she just breathed. She let her head fall back. Let the stillness settle. Her fingers trailed down the line of her thigh, absent-minded, soothing. Nothing more. But her breath shifted. Just a little. The kind of quiet that fills a room right before a storm. She closed her eyes. Let herself feel her body again, not as a weapon. Not as armor. But as a living thing. Warm. Wanting. Worn. Not broken. Not yet. It was the night before the sky broke. Not with thunder. But with fire. In the room of requirement, now a hidden war room for the students who followed her, Calla Monroe stood at the center of a moving map. Glowing lines arced across the air, patrol routes, evacuation corridors, enchanted doors and secret exits. The castle pulsed in slow rhythm beneath it all, alive with tension. Around her, nearly 30 students waited. Neville. Seamus. Luna. Ginny. Dean. Even 2 Slytherins, pale-faced and silent, clutching borrowed wands. Calla didn't raise her voice. She never had to. Tonight, she said, you are no longer students. Her tone was low. Measured. Steel wrapped in velvet. You are eyes in the dark. You are arms that shield. You are the reason someone else makes it out alive. She turned slowly in place, meeting every eye. Not all of you will cast spells. Some of you will guide the youngest to the tunnels. Others will mark safe walls. Some of you may have to strike. A beat. Her expression softened, not with fear, but with something deeper. Care. And if you do, you will remember who you are. She lifted her wand. It shimmered gold. The last lesson I'll ever teach you is this: the strongest defense is knowing you've already survived worse. She flicked her wand. The map split, dividing into personalized assignments, color-coded and enchanted. Take your positions, she said. And just like that, the room emptied. Not with panic, but with purpose. She lingered after they left. Her fingers brushed the wall where she had etched their names in invisible ink, one by one, across the year. Every student who had trained with her. Everyone who had refused to turn away. She mouthed them under her breath. Like prayer. Like armor. One name never made it onto the wall. Harry. She told herself it was because he was already written into a different kind of legend. That he belonged to prophecy, not her roster. That he didn't need her the way the others did. And yet, she still remembered the way his palm felt against hers in the corridor after their duel. The weight of it. How neither of them had pulled away, not right away. How he'd looked at her like she was something dangerous and beautiful and real. There hadn't been fear in his eyes. Not admiration either. It had been something rawer. A hunger neither of them had named. She'd felt it settle low in her belly then. A quiet, undeniable thrum. He was too young. Too bound to the war. And she was too disciplined to act on it. But that didn't stop her from wanting. Not when the halls were empty. Not now, standing in the echo of a room she built with her hands and wit and will, knowing it might not survive the night. Her hand drifted to her side, resting lightly above her hip, where her robes clung to the shape of her. She closed her eyes and breathed deeply. Later, she walked the halls alone. Her long coat whispered over stone. The air was cold and electric. Magic swelled in the walls like pressure behind glass. As she passed the library, she found Luna waiting beside a window, her wand tucked behind one ear like a pencil. "They say you used to be a cheerleader," Luna said dreamily. Calla smiled faintly. "I was." "I think you still are," Luna said. "But for something much older than sports." "Hope," Calla offered. "No," Luna said. "Survival." They stood together in silence for a moment. Then Luna handed her something. A thin piece of parchment, folded 3 times. Calla opened it. It was a sketch. A drawing of her. Cloaked in shadow. Eyes blazing. Wings, black, feathered, enormous, flared behind her like a Valkyrie at rest. Calla looked up. Luna just smiled. "I drew what I think the castle sees when you walk by." Calla blinked. Her throat tightened. "Thank you," she whispered. And she tucked the drawing into the inside pocket of her coat. Over her heart. By midnight, she stood atop the astronomy tower. Not to look for Death Eaters, but to feel the wind. It licked at her hair, tangled her braid. Her wand hung loosely at her side. Her eyes were closed. She was remembering the first time she saw the castle. Age 16. A transfer. A stranger. A girl with too many instincts and no training. Now, she was its shield. She whispered to the stars, "I am ready." Then the first green light struck the sky. Distant. West edge of the grounds. Then a second. Then horns. The warning bells of war. She did not flinch. She turned. She walked. And the castle braced itself behind her. The first explosion tore through the north gate at 1:17 a.m. It was not the biggest blast of the war. But it was the one that shook Hogwarts awake. Calla Monroe was already moving. Her coat whipped behind her as she sprinted through the second-floor corridor, wand high, boots silent. She passed shattered windows, overturned suits of armor, and a trail of scorch marks she hadn't made. The air burned with magic. Screams echoed faintly, not just of fear, but of spell work. Real dueling. She turned left at the tapestry of the Bloody Baron and kicked open a passageway that wasn't there an hour ago. She'd laid the spell earlier, a timed portal. A shortcut through the castle's bones. On the other side, chaos. Dean Thomas and Ernie Macmillan were shielding a collapsed stairwell. For Death Eaters pushed forward with stunning spells and something darker. Curses that hummed low and pulsed black before they struck. Calla dove behind the banister and fired twice. A silent expulso, angled low to crack the floor beneath their feet. A glide hex that disarmed one mid-air, twisting the wand out of his hand like a dance move gone wrong. Dean looked up. "Professor!" She didn't stop moving. "Hold this junction. Use the wedge defense. You practiced it." Ernie blinked. "I don't." Triangle formation. Your shoes light up when you stand in position. Realization. And then action. She trusted them. And kept running. In the main courtyard, fire bloomed. Literal fire. A great serpentine creature conjured by one of the Carrows slithered up the stone walls, casting flickering shadows 20 feet high. Calla didn't hesitate. She raised both arms and sent a binding storm of runes, intricate, spiraling gold, straight into its chest. The spell webbed around it like glass fractals, holding the creature long enough for 3 upper-year students to hit it with icy blasts. The serpent burst into ash. Smoke curled in the night air. She whispered a charm that cleared it, old, ancient, nearly forgotten. The air shimmered like breath on glass. From behind her, a Death Eater tried to strike while her back was turned. He never landed it. She turned mid-spin, grabbed his wrist with one hand, shoved the spell downward, and jammed her wand into his ribs. Somnum silence. He dropped. Sleeping. Silent. Out of the way. At 2:30 a.m., she reached the library, or what was left of it. Spells had torn through entire shelves. First years huddled behind overturned desks, one of them holding a wounded Hufflepuff girl who bled from the shoulder. Calla slid to her knees beside them, cast a barrier charm around the group, and knelt to examine the wound. "It's deep," the girl whispered. "You're deeper," Calla said, tapping her wand to the girl's collarbone. "Breathe in." The healing spell shimmered golden. The pain dropped from her face. "You're going to live," Calla said, brushing her braid back. "But you owe me a library book." The girl smiled, dazed. Then Calla was up again, sweeping toward the staircase, wand in hand. She fought. Room to room. Stair to stair. One spell ahead of collapse. She dueled 2 at once in the staff hallway, used a broken suit of armor as a ricochet wall. She elbowed a masked attacker in the throat, slammed another against a doorframe, disarmed 3 and left them bound in conjured vines. She moved like wind. Fast. Surgical. Beautiful in a way that was almost terrifying. And then, a flash of green. From above. A hex screamed toward a student too slow to duck. Calla threw herself between them. The spell caught her shoulder and knocked her sideways. She hit the wall. Hard. Everything went white. She came to in a haze. Someone was over her, Ginny. "Calla," she whispered. "Stay with me." "I'm fine," Calla muttered, voice thick. "Don't lie." "I'm not," Ginny said, but her hand trembled. Calla sat up slowly. Her coat was torn at the shoulder. Blood soaked the seam. She pulled it tight, wincing, and reached for her wand with her good arm. Ginny looked like she might cry. "Go," Calla said, voice low. "Back to the South Hall. They'll need someone who can scream louder than the fear." Ginny hesitated, then nodded. And ran. Calla stood again. She could barely lift her wand. But she walked. Straight toward the sounds of battle. Every step, slower. Every breath, harder. But she walked. Because the castle still stood. And she had made a promise. It was nearly dawn. The sky over the castle was a bruised lavender, heavy with smoke and rising ash. Screams had faded to shouts. Spells to silence. The final duels were being fought in corners. Behind pillars, in collapsed classrooms, beneath the shattered remnants of ceiling charms. Calla Monroe stood in the ruins of the west hallway, left arm limp at her side, blood slick on her palm. Her wand burned in her grip. She had no more spells left. Only instinct. The Death Eater didn't hesitate. He lunged, tall, masked, robes blackened from earlier blasts. He struck with raw, violent fury. Magic that hissed and cracked and ignored finesse. Calla ducked. Barely. The curse grazed her side. She staggered, used the spin to plant her foot, and drove forward, wand in reverse grip, the way she'd been taught by her father years ago, back when she still thought magic was myth and battle was boots on gravel. She didn't cast a spell. She shoved it into his chest. The force of it, the spellless surge of raw, directed will, knocked him off his feet. She leapt. Tackled. Pinned. His wand arm swung upward. She caught it. Snapped it. He screamed. Only once. Then she stunned him, bound him, rolled off his chest, and lay there for one breath. 2. Then rose. Down the corridor, Neville was leading the youngest through a broken archway, toward the Great Hall, where survivors were regrouping. Calla limped after them. She could barely hear anything over the ringing in her ears. But she saw movement near the stairs. 2 students. One too small to be there. One bleeding from the ribs. And a robed figure approaching. Fast. Calla didn't think. She ran. She got there just before the spell struck. Threw up her arm. No wand. Just raw will again. The blast hit her directly. White hot. She felt her legs give way. Felt her knees hit stone. Felt the impact like a bell behind her ribs. But the students were untouched. Still standing. She smiled, or tried to. Then the world dimmed. And Calla Monroe collapsed. She didn't die. But she didn't wake for 2 days. When she opened her eyes, the battle was over. Voldemort was dead. The castle still stood. Broken, but breathing. Ginny was beside her bed. Hermione too. You saved 5 people, Hermione whispered. After you passed out. Calla blinked. That seems inefficient. They laughed. And then they cried. Weeks passed. The world rebuilt itself. The prophet did not run her name. Her portrait was not hung in the Great Hall. But in the defense classroom, the one she never got to finish decorating, there was a plaque nailed to the wall. A small one. It read, in honor of the Silent Shield. Professor Calla Monroe was strategist. Fighter. Ghost in the halls. She kept the castle standing. Students whispered her name like a spell that couldn't be taught. They told stories. She saved me. She predicted that blast. She was everywhere and nowhere. Some said she left. Some said she still walked the castle at night, checking corners, brushing dust from old sigils. Only a few ever saw her again. But those who did swore. She was smiling. And still watching. Always watching. And so ends the story of Professor Calla Monroe. She arrived at Hogwarts a stranger. Too young, too beautiful, too sharp for her own good. A former cheerleader from a military family, dropped into the world of magic with scars from places wizards had never seen. She was dismissed. She was mocked. They called her a distraction, a rumor, a ministry mistake in tailored robes. But they never saw the hours she kept, working spells no textbook could teach. They didn't hear her whisper protective charms through the stone when no one was listening. They didn't know how many lives she saved long before the battle ever began. She taught magic the way soldiers teach survival, with rhythm, breath, and timing. She made her own curriculum. She trained the overlooked. And when the war came, she did what no one expected. She stayed. She held lines others abandoned. She fought without applause. She bled without witnesses. And when the walls of Hogwarts cracked, she stood where others fell. Silent, steady, watching. They never hung her portrait in the Great Hall. No statue bears her name. But in quiet corners of the castle, students still tell stories of the professor who moved like smoke and struck like a blade. Of the woman who taught them how to live, how to fight, and how to trust themselves, even in the dark. And if you listen closely, they say you can still feel her magic. In the war rooms. In the training halls. In the echo between spells, when your hand tightens on your wand and your breath finds its rhythm. She was more than a rumor. She was the line between chaos and survival. She was a shield with a heartbeat. And though her name may fade from official records, Hogwarts remembers her. Always.